പിതാവേ, നിന്റെ തിരുസന്നിധിയിൽ ഞങ്ങൾ അടിയങ്ങളെ സമർപ്പിക്കുന്നു. ദൈവമേ, ഞങ്ങൾക്കൊന്നിച്ച് കൂടി വന്ന് ഈ ക്ലാസ്സിൽ അറ്റൻഡ് ചെയ്യുവാനായിട്ട് തന്നിരിക്കുന്ന സമയത്തെ ഓർത്ത് ഞങ്ങൾ നിന്നെ സ്തുതിക്കുന്നു. നിന്റെ കൃപയും അനുഗ്രഹവും ഞങ്ങളോട് ഇരിക്കണമേ. ഈ ക്ലാസ്സിൽ ഉടനീളം നിങ്ങൾക്ക് വേണ്ടിയിരിക്കുന്ന നിർദ്ദേശങ്ങൾ തരികയും ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് വേണ്ടിയിരിക്കുന്ന എല്ലാവിധമായ ശക്തിയും തന്ന് ഇതിൽ സംബന്ധിക്കുവാനായിട്ടും ഇതിൽ നിന്നും ദൈവമേ ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് എന്തെങ്കിലുമൊക്കെയും ലഭിക്കുവാനായിട്ടും കൃപ തരണമേ എന്നും താഴ്മയായിട്ട് പ്രാർത്ഥിക്കുന്നു. നിന്റെ കൃപയിൽ നിറച്ചുകൊള്ളണമേ. ഞങ്ങൾ നിന്നെയും ഏകജാതനായ പുത്രനെയും പരിശുദ്ധനെയും സ്തുതിച്ച് ഒന്നിച്ച് മഹത്വപ്പെടുത്തുവാനായിട്ട് തന്നെ. So we had one class last Sunday and we went through certain chapters of the book, and this is the continuation from the first unit. I took 3 lessons which were longer lessons and was introduction also. So I was only taking 3 lessons from the first chapter, first unit. So we are going into the 4th, 5th and 6th lesson, and also going into the second unit, a few lessons from the second unit. In the lesson 4, we are getting the idea of communication in counseling. Previously, we talked about what counseling is and also the theoretical understanding of that, and what pastoral counseling is, how the two have common material, how they are connected, and all of that. And pastoral counseling is, like we talked about, it is a compilation of a biblical understanding into the counseling process, which according to author was organized and formulated by Christian ministers as a way of helping people in the emotional difficulties in the area of counseling. So we are going into lesson 4 of the first unit, which is the lesson is titled Communication in Counseling. Counseling is very much related, very much connected with the communication. Then how that communication is perfected, how that is made possible, those are the main agenda of counseling also. This author is saying that counseling is intended for minor mental disorders. Actually, even though the book is suggesting like that, counseling has much greater scope. It goes even beyond that. Even with major problems, also counseling is kind of combined, connected with that to get the help. Even with the medication therapy, pharmacological therapy through psychiatrists, counseling is combined to bring emotional help for people. According to the author in the lesson 4, is talking about major disorders are cutting a person from reality. Talking about schizophrenia and diseases, disorders like that. These people will get away into a different world for themselves. They are living in a different reality altogether. Minor disorders, according to the person, according to the author, is not cutting a person from reality. They are staying within the reality but struggling emotionally, named worrying, fear, anxiety, depression, like that. You heard of common things like depression, anxiety, and all of that. And any counselor will have to be trained in this area to bring help. In other words, not a person can simply walk in from the street, and where there are certain elements of counseling. We talked about that in the last class. But in order to have an adequate counseling process, the counselor will have to be trained in the appropriate area. Then the author is talking about some basic principles of counseling. There are two methods of counseling described there. One is verbal communication. The other one is non-verbal communication. So in the communication area, there are two different segments. One is verbal communication, talking. The other one is non-verbal communication. Verbal communication is all through words and words alone. It is a talking counseling. Non-verbal communication is through gestures, voice modulations, changing of tone, a person's smile, affection, love, heartiness. So different types of emotion are included in the non-verbal communication. So there are two: verbal communication, non-verbal communication. In the verbal communication, with words only, ideas are shared. It is like a talk and a speech by a person. When a speech is given, there's a speaker and the listener. Speaker will talk using words, and the listener will listen. In this, the intellectual communication, the speaker speaks and only the listener listens. When we come to the non-verbal communication, the idea is different. It is changing. In this one, the counseling, the client is speaking and the counselor is listening. So the order is changed. In the first one, the speaker is speaking. I mean, the one who is taking the class is speaking, and the listener is listening. The second one, the client or the one who is needy is speaking, and the counselor is listening. So it's the other way around. Then the author talks about how different things are read and different responses are brought to by people. He made a statement, and the author Achin is talking about different responses to a statement. The statement that he made was, "My brother has been involved in a car accident in the Gulf. A telegram from there says that his condition is serious. The news has upset me." This is a statement. And then he is bringing different responses to this statement by different people in different ways. The first statement, statement A, is the person is saying, "Is he your younger brother? Where is the where in the Gulf is he? When did the telegram arrive? Is there anyone to attend to him or help him?" That is one response. And he's evaluating that as that response is an inquiry, want to more details about the situation. A second response that he's mentioning is, the person is saying, "Car accident? Everyone drives very fast in the Gulf. An accident means sure death. That's the second response. And the interpretation of that is, the second person is passing a judgment. It is more harm than good with that kind of a response. It's not going to help the listener. A third person is responding. There are many accidents and deaths reported every day in the newspaper. There is news in today's paper also about 2 dead bodies being brought from the Gulf. The third person's response is evaluated like is universalizing the experience. It is not very helpful either. Then a fourth one mentioned there is, you may be in great anxiety now. It must be terribly upsetting for you because the news is that the condition of your brother is very serious. This is a fourth person. And that is evaluated like this person is making an attempt to understand the state of mind of that person a little bit. Some help or some comfort is brought by that response. A fifth person is responding, really bad news. I too feel very sad. Having heard the news, I feel bad. This is another response. And this person is simply expressing some sympathy. Then another person is responding, this is life. It is mixture of both happiness and sadness. The only thing we can do is to suffer our sorrow. That is evaluated like this person is making a philosophical statement about things in life, happenings in life, like that. Yet another person is responding, really sorry. What has happened is, with God's knowledge, He has His own ways. Let us seek refuge in prayers. That is evaluated like this person is spiritualizing the situation. And the hearer, whoever you are saying that to, is thinking, will God do that to me? Is God that way? Something like that. The last of response shown in the book is this person is saying, never mind, don't worry. Perhaps your brother has escaped with some minor injuries. Had he been in a worse condition, news would have been here by now. This is evaluated like is trying to minimize the gravity of the situation and sort of giving a false hope to the listener. The situation may be entirely different. So communication. So that in that segment is talking about communication, how people communicate, and that is very, very essential, very, very important in counseling. Then we are coming to lesson 5. Here, listening skill and listening and its importance are being described. Listening has an inner meaning. Indifference is not going to help somebody. So listening has to be without indifference. Listening has to be more attentive. That is the theme of that lesson. And then the author is bringing some biblical connection to that from the book of Epistle of James, James 1:19. Let every man be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. Then author is also bringing a portion from a verse from Genesis 4:10. Voice of your brother's blood is crying to me. God hears. So listening, the author is now trying to connect that with the biblical understanding of God's listening to human beings' problem. And he's talking about the psalmist talking about the same thing. Psalm 27:7, hear, O Lord, when I cry aloud. Then talking about Lord heard the cry of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all the fathers, Moses, David, the prophets. In the New Testament, the author is talking about Jesus Christ hearing the cry of the oppressed, the downtrodden, patients, sinners, tax collectors, prostitutes, etc. And then making a final statement about that, the basis of prayer mainly is God's listening to, God hearing my prayer. That is the basis of prayer. So it's a statement made in the book. Then the author is kind of drifting into how to listen. There are 3 ways of listening mentioned there, 3 types of listening. So this whole chapter is listening and the importance of listening. The first is pretended listening. Second one is superficial listening. And the third one is deep listening. A pretended listening is not a sincere one. Kind of sitting somewhere, somebody is talking, you think that you're listening, or you're giving the other person kind of an idea that you are listening, but you are not actually listening. Without attentiveness, only creating an impression that you are listening. Mind does not take anything out of that. In other words, your mind is somewhere else. You are listening to something, but you are somewhere else. This creates emotional distancing. Counseling, if this kind of listening is used, then you and the counselor, or the counselor and the client, they are distanced. They are not attached. Then the second one is superficial listening, which is paying some attention, but not full attention. Here, a common thing that we heard all the time called selective listening. What selective listening is, for certain things, you put your attention to, you listen to that. The others, you don't listen. That is superficial listening. For example, if you are doing a counseling session, if let's say you are a counselor and you are doing a counseling session, you are, let's say, counseling a couple. They are talking about their intimate relationship. Then all of a sudden they began to talk about their sexual relationship. All of a sudden you are very, very enthused about that. You want to hear more. And then you probe in and ask questions, and you bring all the listening capacity there. And those kinds of fragmented listening is called selective listening. Selective listening is not going to help the client. You have to hear the client entirely. Selective listening is another way of saying paying attention to some detail or some topics, some interesting topic, but not all. And the communicator or the client will hesitate to continue to talk because Other times you are not listening, but when certain things came, you are listening. Then the third one is deep listening, listening attentively or wholeheartedly. So 3 ways of listening. One is pretended listening, superficial listening, and deep listening. That concludes the 5th lesson. Then we are going into the 6th lesson. In this one, the author is starting with a fear in people. A lot of the time people have a fear to go for help, fear to approach a counselor or go into counseling, because the fear of them being labeled as insane or not very stable. The fear of being labeled as insane keeps people from going for help. But a person will have to go about that fear to get help. Then the author is talking about another phenomena called defense mechanism of the unconscious. We talked about unconscious. We talked about conscious, and we talked about unconscious is holding emotions in a person, and that unconscious feelings or emotions will have to be brought into the conscious mind. That process is called a catharsis, and that has to happen to help a person. Defense mechanism is created by all individual. That is a given. That is a biological mechanism created in people to guard against mental breakdown. So it is a security system within everybody. A security system is created to prevent one from slipping into mental breakdown. And Freud talked about this quite a bit. And he said this is a temporary arrangement. It's a temporary protection mechanism, a temporary method. It cannot be used all the time. It is like it's kind of compared to a shock absorber in a car. It helps to minimize the shock or prevent the shock, and it absorbs the shock and helps the vehicle from bigger shocks. And that can only be used temporarily, meaning the author is saying that a person will have to go for help to get the problem solved, rather than kind of relying on this mechanism all the time. If you do that, sooner or later, you will come up with a mental breakdown. That is the assumption. And then the author is talking about 3 categories of people needing counseling. Who are these 3 category people? 1, those who suffer from inferiority feeling. The second one is those who want to hide their feelings all the time. A third category is those who want to run away or escape from problems. So one is suffer from inferiority. The second one is those who hide their feelings. The third one is those who run away from their feelings. Then the author is kind of describing inferiority feeling, what inferiority is, and bringing Alfred Adler is a counselor, and he held that personality is determined by an inner urge for recognition and a desire for power. So he's talking about everybody. All humans have a tendency or need to maintain power. Children, teenagers, adults, everybody has its need. A recognition and a desire for power. And in that system, there are two divisions. One is people are either inferior or superior. Inferior is a lower, helpless, very subdued type of feeling, and superior feeling is a compensating feeling to cover the inferiority. People will go into that to cover the inferiority. Inferiority is a person's failure to a person's past to recognize his or her initial quality as a person. So inferior people will have difficulty acknowledging their quality. They will deny the quality or discount the quality, or they will totally ignore the quality. And how do they do that? The author is talking about by comparison with other people. Mr. So-and-so is better than me. Oh, they have better things. I don't have that. I'm inferior. So they eventually place them in an inferiority state in the comparison. They create a low self-esteem, or so low self-respect. Self-esteem or self-respect, both are same. They become helpless. They tend to be different from other people. They tend to be afraid of accepting responsibility. They shy away from responsibility, all because they don't have a good opinion about themselves. That is inferiority. Inferiority feeling is caused by mishandling of the childhood. That's where most of the psychologists, counselors did their work on, kind of how the inferiority began to happen. Childhood difficulties, childhood shaming, childhood put downs, childhood lack of encouragement, childhood criticism by other people, unhealthy comparisons, and that a lot of modern family or non-family in our community also do that. They compare the deficits of a child. If your child is deficit in something, you tend to compare your child with some other child who is better at something. Will be compared and contrasted with the strength of another child. This child eventually will do something in their mind. They try to do their best to become the ideal figure. So their parents told them they have to be that way, or the teacher told them they have to be that way, and they try to come up with that. They try to be the ideal figure. But the threshold is too high. The bar is too high. They cannot go over it. They fail. Then they fail and they end up in inferiority, feeling bad. I failed again. I failed again. That kind of feeling. The symptoms of inferiority. Then the author is talking about how do we notice inferiority. One is an absorbing interest in one's own thoughts and feeling, and a total indifference to those of others. So these people are kind of involved, immersed in themselves. They don't care about other people. They are into themselves too much. A second one is a tendency to blow out of proportion failures in life. Little thing happened, they create a big deal out of that. Kind of make it too big, too high. A third one is an inquisitiveness about what others think about me, and they're feeling that others' remarks are, or they're smiling at me, is aimed at making fun of me. This is like a fear also. I think that other people are talking about me, or other people are making fun of me, and that will create, that is a symptom of a way of noticing inferiority. Another one is a desire to be alone and aloof from other people. Loners, they become alone people. They don't mingle with people. They don't have company. They don't like to have company either. A fifth one is a keen desire to listen to others praising oneself repeatedly. These people want to hear other people praise them. They want to hear big things about them. And they are very keen about that because they want to be compensated for their bad feeling inside. A sixth one is an absolute unwillingness to shoulder responsibility and participate in competition of any kind for fear of failure. So these people, because they think they fail, they avoid situation. They don't take responsibility. They don't take part in any kind of competition. They stay away simply because they have bigger fear kind of controlling them. A seventh one is an urge to speak badly of others in an attempt to create the impression that they are inferior to me, and a tendency to exaggerate their weakness, finding fault with other people, putting other people down to compensate what is happening inside. How to counter the inferiority feeling? So this chapter is talking about inferiority feeling is keeping people in mental agony, mental distress. How to counter that? One kind of recommendation made in the book is stop comparing with other people, and then kind of admit that you have a personality of yourself, of your own. You are different from other person, and you are unique, and don't worry about that kind of a feeling. And then take these steps slowly, and take them as stepping stones to go forward. So this is the end of first unit, and now we are walking into the second unit. Second unit is more talking about counseling as such. And in the second unit, the first lesson is talking about models of counseling. And author is talking about different psychologists developed different models. In doing counseling, two things are pointed out, lifted out. One is technique, the other one skill. Techniques and skills. These are the things that a counselor will have to master to do counseling in a good way. Techniques and skills. That means specialized knowledge of methods of handling people. You have to have the specialized knowledge to handle people according to their need. Then the author is talking about one particular counselor and talking about his model of counseling. His name is Robert Kirchhoff, and talking about Robert Kirchhoff's model of counseling, and also pointed out different counselors and different psychologists developed different models of counseling, namely Carl Rogers called client-centered therapy. Client-centered therapy is only mentioned there. What client-centered therapy means is the counselor is putting more attention and more interest in the client, and not what the counselor will have to say, but focusing in on the client and creating a system out of that client-centered situation. Client is the most important thing there. Then Eric Berne, another psychologist, another counselor, he developed one called a transactional analysis. The book did not go into very far, just mentioned that. TA or transactional analysis is a psychological theory or personality theory in which you understand personality and dealings of people according to how they talk. Transaction, how transaction is made, how talks are done. And if you know some about TA, there are three ego levels: parent ego level, adult ego level, and child ego level. And how each ego level is functioning, how the transaction from each ego level into the next person, into their parent, child, and adult ego level, how that kind of create situations in communication. Then talking about Gestalt. Gestalt is an imaginary arrangement in which you create the scene that you are talking. For example, if I give you an example, the book is not talking about that, but if I give you an example, let's say you have a lot of anger towards your parent, your father, and you are kind of stuck with that anger. Then the Gestalt method is the counselor will ask you to, if you're the client, counselor will ask you to put your parent on the next chair and face your parent and start talking. Even though the parent is not sitting there in that chair, the parent is placed there in that chair, and a scenario is created, and you start talking. And by that method, the emotional tension will be brought out, and the catharsis is made happen by the transaction. Then there is reality therapy, insight therapy, rational emotive therapy, All of these are mentioned in there. Then the author is coming back to the one person that I mentioned earlier, Robert Kirchhoff, and how he did his counseling, or what his model was all about. And Kirchhoff held it is a response of the counselor from a superior level that gives consolation to the person seeking help. So Kirchhoff is kind of placing the counselor in a superior place, and the counselor is talking to the client in an inferior place, not inferiority, but in an inferior place, and counseling is done like that. That's only one model. There are many other models and other models with equality and seeing the client as equal as the counselor. There are different modalities there. They are not in the book, but I'm just mentioning that. Then that chapter is talking about, that lesson is talking about 3 stages of counseling. The first stage is called the initial stage. The second one is called intermediary stage. And the last one is called the final stage. And in the initial stage, what happens in a counseling situation is, it is stage setting, creating an atmosphere, relationship building, a confidence building. Those are the theme or things in an initial level. Counselor has to be competent in that, in setting this. Counselor, we have to know what to do to set this stage, set the atmosphere. And there has to be the counselor will have to understand the problem, and also counselor will have to be trustworthy. This is a very, very important point in counseling. The counselor will have to be trustworthy, otherwise it will not go anywhere. So a lot of talks, we also heard about a lot of talks about, oh, I cannot go for counseling because the counselor may leak that information and say that to other people, so I'm afraid. So that rapport, all of that is called rapport, R-A-P-P-O-R-T, rapport. And the rapport is broken. If that is broken, counselor is not going to go anywhere. There is nothing happening. The intermediary stage is an exploratory stage, is exploring the problem. In the language of Freud, it is a catharsis. We talked about catharsis earlier. It is a catharsis. There's a joint effort in this intermediary stage to dig into the problem and explore the problem. A lot of history will be asked, and a lot of situations will be asked to be explained, and all of that. The exploring can lead to a diagnosis. So diagnosis is important. You have to diagnose what the problem is. If a doctor will have to treat, to diagnose, otherwise it will be a simple attempt. The problem may not be taken care. So diagnosis is important, exploring the situation, and catharsis will happen in that. The third and final stage is called decision-making stage. Making decision does not mean offering advice. So that is very, very important about counseling. Counseling is not actually about giving advice. Earlier we talked about it is a skill by which you are letting the client handle or helping the client handle the problem, helping them to learn to fish. We talked about that in the last class. Making decision does not mean offering advice. Only encourage client to come in terms with the reality. A lot of the time, because of the problem, they skip away or they shy away from reality, kind of bringing them back into the reality and asking them to stay in the reality, take responsibility like that. In that skillful way, if the client is getting the meaning, they are getting somewhere. And a decision can be made because of that. And then slowly, some practical things, how to put them into practice, those things are dealt with. That's a third stage. It is a duty of the counselor at this stage, the third stage, to kind of safeguard the client, dissuade the client from taking unrealistic or impracticable decisions. Some of the time, the client will kind of jump into kind of extreme measures, and it is a counselor's responsibility to kind of guide them and keep them within practical measures, practical methods to do a decision. This stage should end at every sitting of counseling. Towards the end of every sitting, there has to be some decision making and some mutual understanding between the client and the counselor, and the session will be ended with a preparedness for a further meeting. And out of the book, there are many things. If a depressed person, a suicidal person is coming in, some of the time that person may not make a decision to make another session. Very carefully, conveniently, the counselor will have to find a way to make them agree to another session. And those are skilled way of making that, skillful way of making that. And if that decision is made, then there is continuity. The counseling helps. Otherwise, if that is not done in a suicidal person, from that meeting to the next meeting, between that time, that person may do something drastic, go somewhere, or kill, or something like that. Okay, that is the end of Unit 2, Lesson 1, where now we are going to Lesson 2. Intimate relationship in counseling. That's the title of that lesson. Intimate relationship in counseling. We talked about rapport a minute ago. Rapport and intimate relationship. That is the theme of this particular lesson. Rapport is the intimacy that urges one to confide in another. So there's an intimacy from the client side that urges the client to be willing to share things with the counselor. That rapport, that intimacy is very, very important in counseling. To confide, otherwise, if you ask something, you cannot. Difficult problems, you cannot confide that or disclose that to just anybody. So there has to be something special, and that is called rapport or intimacy there. The term also, the rapport or intimate relation, term also implies the intellectual capacity of the person who receives the secret his ability to keep the secret, meaning the counselor will have to prove that he or she is able to keep the secret, or their difficulty without getting leaked. There has to be that kind of a rapport or a sense, an intimate sense developed so that a client can share things with a counselor. For that, a good impression will have to be given to the client. Counselor will have to show or give a good impression. Some of them are, the required things are the dress code. If a counselor is walking with the shabby clothes and unkempt and all of that, that will give the client an impression, this person is not taking care of himself. How can I trust? How can I confide my secret in this person? So dress code is important, voice is important, manner is important, gestures are important. And about the counseling office, again, it has to be nicely arranged, a kind of comfortable arrangement. It didn't have to be posh, but a comfortable arrangement, a comfortable atmosphere. And the counselor will have to be clear and specific, loud and clear. We get that expression, or the loud and clear. The counselor will have to be loud and clear. Have to have a pleasant face on the counselor, a pleasantness in the face, and a tendency to listen patiently. We talked about listening skills earlier. Kind of deep listening is needed. Then the book is talking about Karkov's yardstick. The psychologist brought an idea to help people. And he is talking about an imaginary yardstick with 5 graded points to that. 0 to 3 is, or below 3 is mediocre. 3 or above are all right. And towards closer to 5 is very impressive and very effective. So these are the 3 points that the book is talking about. The Karkov's imaginary yardstick to measure a counselor's ability or grade that can be given to a counselor. Below 3, not effective. 3 or above, somewhat or moderately effective. 5 or closer to 5, very effective in counseling. Okay, then the book is talking about remarks of 3 people to a student who has not scored very high in an examination as expected. These are 3 people remarking to a student who did not score very high in an examination. The first person is remarking, never mind, what is the use of worrying? The second person is remarking, perhaps you are a little upset At least you have been able to pass when many others failed. A third person's remark is, perhaps you have had high ambition and has expected to get very high marks. Now, the anxiety that you are not likely to fulfill your hopes and aspirations because your marks are low probably troubles you. I can very well understand your anxiety. So these are three different ways of remarking. The first remark is serving very minimal purpose. Do not serve the purpose. It is scoring the lower point, that is below 3. The second one is fairly a satisfactory statement. He got into the feeling of the student to a certain degree. This reaction stays around 3. Then the last statement is a reaction stands out at a higher level. He realizes the anxiety of the student, capable of understanding the plight of the student, and grades almost closer to 5. So these are ways in which Kharkov kind of suggested how counseling has to be done. Then we are coming to lesson 3, which is Kharkov's conclusion about the quality of a counselor. Here, some good points are brought in there. It's about listening skill and also the counseling process. One main theme or important thing in there is the capacity to have empathy. The book is talking about 2 things there: sympathy and empathy. Sympathy is kind of having a considerate feeling for somebody else's problem and trying to understand the feeling of the other person, kind of attempting to share, attempting to understand the feeling of another person. Then comes empathy. Empathy is a higher level. Empathy is understanding the emotional problem of another person and the capacity to put yourself, you as a counselor, yourself in their place and understand the gravity of that situation and be able to communicate or share that to the client. So sympathy is simply feeling sorry for the situation. Empathy is much higher. It has the capacity of understanding the feeling and being able to put yourself in their place and understand the gravity and then communicate that with the client. So empathy is deeper and empathy is very, very needed in counseling. Okay. Empathy realizes the mental state of another and places himself in the position of the other person and feels for that person. Empathy has 2 aspects. One is it is an ability to realize the feeling of another, and sympathy has some of that. But empathy has that, plus it is a skill which enables you to give expression to the feelings of the other person. Empathy promotes confidence and a liking for the person who practices empathy. And when you are showing empathy, the listener or the client has a liking towards you. And liking is a rapport, and that by that rapport, the counselor will be able to share things with you and go into different stages of counseling. And therefore, empathy is called as a key for counseling. Empathy is a key for counseling. Then this chapter or this lesson is talking about concreteness. Being clear, that's what it means. Concreteness. Be clear or get the matters organized. What happens is, in a mentally disturbed or emotionally disturbed person, that person will talk and talk and talk without any organization. We in counseling call it a word salad. A word salad. Different things kind of mixed up, not in any order. And the concreteness that is brought in the situation by the counselor is sifting and organizing the clutters and the thoughts to a methodical and sorted out manner. You have to put them in organized way so that they can make some sense. Otherwise, there is no sense. Even when you hear a client in his emotional problem, they'll be rambling, talking a lot of things. There is no order, there is no clarity, there is no concreteness. And it is the responsibility of the counselor to bring them back into order. This will help to bring clarity and will help the troubled person to understand the problem, enabling to achieve some solution, making a contract, making a decision, and go forward. The facts relating to the problem will have to be presented in a methodical manner, and the counselor is the key in doing that. That is the end of the third lesson in the second unit. And here we are 5:40, and we are going to close here. And if you have any questions, you can ask. And like I said in the first meeting, it's a very dry subject and subject that will make you sleep and all of that. If you all have any questions, you may ask.
I had a question, Ajahn.
Yeah.
I had a question. It's about empathy, and maybe not for the counselor's part, but I'm just curious. I worked in schools, and I've heard social workers say that students who don't have empathy, it's not something that you can instill in them, and it's very it's very, I don't know what is the word, like it's not something you can instill in them, and you worry for them in their future.
Right.
Is that true?
That's right. That is true. See, empathy. Let's see, here we were kind of looking at it like between the counselor and the client. But any student, any person, they have to have that kind of mental capacity to be a worthwhile person, to understand the feeling of other person, to be able to put themselves in their situation, understand the gravity and all of that for any person, not only for counselors, for any student, anybody. Yeah.
And so can you change that? If a child doesn't have empathy, or an adult doesn't have empathy, or doesn't show much of it, can that be instilled in them? Or is that a loss?
They can be trained, they can be coached, they can gain some of that. And some people have an acquired ability to get into that right away. Some are better in that area. Some are kind of mediocre about that. You can get a lot of coaching about that, and you can get trained. Yes.
Even adults?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And then comes all kinds of connected things like attention deficit and difficulties like that. And those are some of the things kind of standing in the way for you to be empathic.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
so there are different mental blocks that is keeping you away from that. And the sociopaths and the people who do not have any, we call conscience and all of that. These are people who are suffering from not having the empathy.
So those without empathy, they could very likely be on the path to being a sociopath.
But those are the extreme
Right.
things. Yeah, extreme.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Actually, along the same lines, on the same topic, empathy. You mentioned that you have to be in the shoes of the others.
Yes.
And kind of able to realize the feelings of the others. So
yeah, you don't actually have to be in the shoe of the other person, but you have to be able to grasp that. You have to be able to understand that.
Yeah. So my question here is, if I want to start practicing empathy, I'm not a counselor, but I want to empathize, show empathy. What are the traits you would think of, or what are the skills, or what are the basic things you need? Would you consider like effective listening as one of them? What other traits or characteristics would you have? If I want to practice empathy.
In order to kind of get trained in that, one thing is kind of slowly kind of allowing you to slowly place yourself in such a similar scenario. If the client is going through a certain type of emotional problem, if I am in that emotional problem, if I'm in that situation, what does that mean to me? How am I going to be? What will I say? Things like that. So kind of allowing you to kind of get into it's a way of getting into the shoe of the other one. Am I confusing? Am I confusing you, or am I?
No. So, you think that people like, see, you're kind of talking about the counselors, but you think people like us will be able to do it, right?
Yes. It is also kind of training yourself from different types of listening. We talked about 3 types of listening. What were they? We talked about pretended listening, superficial listening, and deep listening. So you can train yourself from the pretended listening to deep listening by some attempts. You can get there. Likewise, you can also get into the empathic level by kind of being more patient with the other person, being more kind of able to kind of tolerate the other one, being able to stay within the emotional stability when you hear the problem of the other one. I may be kind of crowding that with a lot of things there. It is a trained method to get there. From little empathy to bigger empathy, you can train yourself. Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Maybe
any other? Yeah.
One more question, probably along the line Johnny just mentioned. I'm just thinking as this discussion, not so much a counselor, but I'm thinking of the parent-child relationships and how we can be more empathetic with our youth and the situations they're going through that may not be like our own. You know, every generation is different. And how, just to bridge gaps overall, I'm just thinking whether they're our own children or others' children. Just anything you can suggest along that line in terms of this topic of empathy.
My suggestion about that is the general tendency is for a parent or somebody similar to in a parental role, the tendency a lot of the time is jump into conclusion. If a child is presenting a problem, a child is bringing an anxiety and trying to share that, even going further into listening to that situation or fully listening to that, you tend to jump into conclusion. You bring your solution already and bombard that solution to the child. And child is not getting any help because of that. So again, it is like you kind of stand by and learn to listen more, learn to hear the client or the child in that situation, so that you generally are going to create empathy. And if you are impatient and jumping into a conclusion or making assumption right away and stuff like that, you are skipping the empathic method, and empathy is being skipped from you. And if you tend to listen more, and we talked earlier about two types of communication, intellectual and emotional. Intellectual is kind of talking and hearing, and in the emotional listening, you are kind of letting the client talk rather than the counselor talk. In other words, having more of a listening ear, and that listening ear will improve your empathy. Am I making it any clear? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Very clear. Appreciate it.
Yeah. 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 Okay. Anybody else? Any other question? Or else we can close here. I'm going to join you next Sunday. And I'm going to be in Philadelphia, and I'm going to join you from there for the class. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Acho. അങ്ങനെയാണെങ്കിൽ പ്രാർത്ഥിച്ചു കഴിഞ്ഞിട്ട് മറ്റു ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻസ് ഇല്ലെങ്കിൽ പ്രാർത്ഥിച്ചു കഴിഞ്ഞിട്ട് നമുക്ക് കൺക്ലൂഡ് ചെയ്യാം.
ഓ ശരി, താങ്ക് യു. നമുക്ക് പ്രാർത്ഥിച്ച് അവസാനിപ്പിക്കാം.
ഓക്കെ.
കാരുണ്യവാനായ ദൈവമേ, ഞങ്ങളോട് ഇരുന്ന് ഞങ്ങളെ പല കാര്യങ്ങളിൽ നയിക്കുന്നതിനാൽ പ്രത്യേകമായിട്ട് സ്തോത്രം ചെയ്യുന്നു. ഇന്ന് ഞങ്ങൾ പല കാര്യങ്ങളെക്കുറിച്ച് ചിന്തിക്കുകയും ആലോചിക്കുകയും ചെയ്തു. ദൈവമേ, നിന്റെ തിരുസാന്നിധ്യം ഞങ്ങളോട് ഇരിക്കണമേ. പല കാര്യങ്ങളെ സംബന്ധിച്ച് ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് അറിയുവാനായിട്ടും ഞങ്ങളുടെ രീതികൾ വ്യത്യാസപ്പെടുത്തുവാനായിട്ടും മറ്റുള്ളവർക്ക് പ്രയോജനകരമായിട്ടുള്ളതായ കാര്യങ്ങളിലേക്ക് ഞങ്ങളുടെ മനസ്സിനെ തിരിക്കുവാനായിട്ടും പ്രത്യേകമായിട്ട് ഞങ്ങൾ നടത്തുന്നതായ ശ്രമത്തിൽ നിന്റെ കാരുണ്യം കൂടിയിരിക്കണമേ. താഴ്മയായിട്ട് പ്രാർത്ഥിക്കുന്നു. ഞങ്ങളെ എല്ലാവരെയും അനുഗ്രഹിക്കണമേ. നിന്റെ കൃപ കൊണ്ട് നിറയ്ക്കണമേ. ഇനി ഞങ്ങൾ കണ്ണുമുട്ടുന്നവരെയും കൂടി വരുന്നവരെയും നിന്റെ അനുഗ്രഹത്തിൽ വെച്ചുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കണമേ എന്ന് പ്രാർത്ഥിക്കുന്നു. ഞങ്ങൾ നിന്നെയും ഏകജാതനായ പുത്രനെയും പരിശുദ്ധായെയും എപ്പോഴും സ്തുതിച്ച് വന്ദിച്ച് മഹത്വപ്പെടുത്തുവാനായിട്ട് തന്നെ. ആമീൻ.
Thank you, Acho.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Thank you, Achan.
ഞാൻ നിങ്ങളെയൊക്കെ ബോറടിപ്പിക്കുന്നുണ്ടല്ലേ? നല്ലതായിട്ട് നല്ല ബോറടിപ്പിക്കുന്നുണ്ടേ.
It's a good class. Thank you so much, Achan.
ഇത് വളരെ ക്ലാസ് ആണ് അച്ഛാ. ഇതൊരു വളരെ ഡിഫറെന്റ് ആയ കാര്യങ്ങളാണ് ഞങ്ങൾ പഠിക്കുന്നത്. വളരെ സന്തോഷകരമാണ് അത്.
Yeah, thank you.
It was a very good class. Thank you so much. Very important.
Very practical. It's nice to know about all these things.
Thank you. Yeah.
And it's not boring at all. It's very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.